Carlton King, the former Scotland Yard Special Branch and MI6 officer and the author of
I was undercover for Special Branch in a jihadi organisation. My name is Carlton King, and welcome to the Black Spy Podcast, the show that shines a light on the world of secret intelligence, national security and armed governmental personal protection operations, but actually majors in on geopolitics. This week, we're looking at part 2 of the programme I started last week.
It's a nice little segue. What do you make of the Bondi Beach thing? The shooting.
That's interesting. I don't know enough about it.
Or when I was in the car when it and it came on the radio, and I remember saying to my children, wow, because Bondi Beach, if for anyone that's ever been there, is very small.
Yeah,
I'd say the beach at
yeah.
Margate is probably comparable to like the size of the beach at Margate. It's not big.
Yeah. So you've been to the fish and chip shop in the middle, have you?
Yeah.
Because everybody goes, because it is that small. That's why I'm saying that, because you know exactly what I mean. Because it's that small.
And it's so the media sort of called it like 10 minutes of terror and all the rest of it. But I remember saying to my kids, wow, like there'd be no getting away from it. I mean, literally, it's a beach.
You just mean right? So I'm seeing what you're saying. You just mean about the attack. You don't mean about the background to it.
No. I do want to talk about the background, obviously. But I remember my first reaction when I heard about it, having been to Bondi Beach many times, is it's really small, and it's a very in terms of an attack, it's very hyper focused. But if you think about the Christmas market attack, or like etc., that like London Bridge even, there are
it's larger. It's larger in size, is what you're saying.
So 15 people lost their life. I think, and others were injured and all the rest of it. But it is equivalent to a classroom shooting or something because it is,
less than, to be fair. Less than, as a general classroom.
And I guess, like, just to circle back in terms of the promises that were made in the Commonwealth and all the rest of it. I mean, what, like, again, I'm not like this isn't a question that has an answer or whatever, but why is anti-Semitism still something that instigates mass homicide?
You see, this is why I say I don't know enough about it, because I'm not familiar with the intel behind it. What I would say, from my time being extremely familiar with the organisations and the groups and intel, because I was running that sort of, I've been to Israel 1,001 times. I've been to the OTs, 101 times. And spoken with both sides of that structure, the intelligence services on both sides of that structure, the police on both sides of that structure, do the general police and then the intelligence service and the security services who deal with it on both sides of that structure. And, if you ask me whether it's anti-Semitism, I'll say no. For most people, it's not anti-Semitism, it's anti-Israel. And there is a difference. But this is why I'm saying I don't know enough about it. If it has been proved that it is anti-Semitism, then okay. For me, if I look at it this way, 150 years ago, as a black person, that's a bit longer now, probably about 200. Yeah, 150 is still probably just get you just about in there, but definitely 200. As a black person, you could go from one end of the Americas to the other end of the Americas, north to south, and be basically enslaved in each place. You could then jump across into Western Europe and be enslaved in each place. And slave catchers, right, did go and seek out people practically throughout most of the Western world, and had a writ of habeas corpus, of allowance to do that, to say, this is my, this is this guy's property, right? Now, you wouldn't turn around and say that was any specific aspect of a particular area. It would be more related to the situational perspective of the time. In other words, what I'm saying is you couldn't say, oh, that was anti-Guinean or anti, I don't know, Angolan or anti whatever. No, no. What it was a picture of was that in all of these lands in the Americas, they had set, and that includes the British colonies as well, in the Americas, North and South, not all the Caribbean. They basically had legal structures that said you cannot be free unless you have legal papers that say you are free, right? So you'd have to submit those legal papers. But was it, was it the fact that everybody you saw was anti-black, or was it the fact that the laws said that these people were somebody else's property? Do you get what I'm saying? Right? And what happens a lot of the time is that individuals, frankly, I think I've figured it out, and I think I've put it as there's a talented 10. So 10% of the individuals in this world actually care. The other 90% just go along with whatever the system is. Right? So, those 10% can be doing it for the good or for the bad or whatever it might be, but they've worked it out for themselves and they say, I'm not happy with this, or I'm not happy with that, I'm not happy with the other. And those people will take some action, maybe, rightly or wrongly, right? And so their perceptions are based on that. So for me, you've always got to, and this is why people don't kind of understand, say, oh, why is that not terrorism? You've always, because terrorism is a political ground and a political reason behind it. So you've always got to understand, and that could be politics, but it's still a political aspect behind it. So you've always got to understand why somebody is doing something other than not just complying. Yeah, because
So,
people just
okay.
comply.
So look, here's a question for you, and maybe for the listeners. So, just circling back to when my mum was on the podcast, and so listeners might be aware that
She
my
was good, by
parents
the
met.
way. She was very good.
They met in Robben Island, and
Yeah.
my mum bust my dad out of prison, and my mum was Nelson Mandela's speechwriter at the time, and at the time they had the opportunity to, well, so when they left South Africa, they had the opportunity to go to America, Canada, the UK, or Australia.
hmm
So they chose the UK because my father had theatre connections there.
hmm
Um, and sometimes my mum will say, oh, oh well, we could have gone to Canada or we could have gone to da da da. But
hmm
actually, they made an educated decision and
hmm
etc. And sometimes as kids I joke, and I, like at Christmas me and my brother would be like, oh God, we could have been on the beach for Christmas. You know? But okay, so hypothetical question, Carlton,
hmm
given your uh you know extensive knowledge, I know, but I won't reveal to listeners that you don't live in the UK, but that's
hmm
all I'll say. Um, where if the whole world was your playground, where would you live?
It's difficult to say. I mean, obviously, I spend a lot of time in the United Kingdom, as I spend a lot of time elsewhere. Um, Look,
As
what
in,
I should
who
have said,
hasn't?
what I should have said. Let me just,
Which government
yeah,
currently hasn't messed it up so
yeah.
badly for the human race
What I
that
do want
it's
to say something.
acceptable to live there?
What I do want to
I
say
mean,
something.
I'm using Dr. Rachel's
Yeah,
voice right
yeah.
now
I know what
because
you're
she would
saying.
be saying, "I'm so
Yeah,
angry about the da da
yeah.
da da da," and probably suggesting that we all move to Greenland or
I
something.
know
But
exactly what you're saying, and that's why I want to put this in on that last bit that I did before. Because what can happen, and this is what's quite interesting about the world. So what I did say to you, that inclusive of all the British colonies in the Americas, slavery ran rate 1838, I think, in 1838 in Jamaica, I think is the emancipation. Uh, Trinidad, Tobago, bit less. Uh, Actually, it was stopped in 1780s in what used to be well, it's Haiti and the Dominican Republic, which used to be all French at one stage, was stopped at the revolution because the revolution stopped everything and there was no such thing as racial laws. Napoleon brought the racial laws back. Okay, so you then had slavery again in the French part then, because it had been taken over, of the Hispaniola, the whole island of Hispaniola. So what I'm saying is things ebb and flow. And what I wanted to say was the Granville Sharp and the Mansfield Directive from Lord Mansfield said that the England's air is too clean for slavery to be on it. So, because what happened is some of these slave searchers from the Caribbean went to seek out a guy, and you got to understand most people's money was in the enslaved people. So they were worth a lot of money, right? So they'd sent slave catchers out and they caught this young lad, and this lad was beaten and he was aided by Granville Sharp and as a wealthy British guy. And then, cut a long story short, basically what happened was they took the case to court, and Lord Mansfield said, no, you can't have slavery in the British Isles. But of course, in the British colonies, you could. So, so it's never just straight. You see, it's never just straight. So, in answer to your question, and I bring that up because in answer to your question, there are good and bad things about many places. And I've been to many a place which I thought, oh, this is nice. And then you think, well, maybe I won't want to live there, but it's still nice.
isn't it funny though? Because
And you mentioned
I
South
mean,
Africa, didn't you? Sorry,
yeah,
I'm
but
just going to
also,
say,
I mean,
it's a
I did a
beautiful
lot of
country, isn't
work.
it?
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful country.
Beautiful,
But as a
beautiful.
child, when I would spend summer holidays there, my grandmother would put put on and please pardon the expression because this was my grandmother's vernacular.
Yeah,
My grandmother, who was a Viennese German who'd escaped to who'd sought uh, protection in South
hmm
Africa during the
hmm
war. Um, so they were literally like the Von Trapps marching
Yeah,
over the
yeah.
Alps.
What was she Jewish? Because many Jewish people went there at
Yeah,
that time. Yeah,
and
many.
and she would put on what was known to myself and my brother and my cousin at the time, but please excuse the inference. She would call it a Kaffir wig.
Yeah,
So when she went out in her car, she would put a black person's wig
yeah,
on
yeah, yeah, yeah,
to drive through a township
yeah,
so that her car wouldn't be carjacked whilst the children were in the car. I mean, we saw it at every level. We saw, the toilets that you could go to. We saw segregated toilets, but we
yeah.
also
Neutral
saw
blanks, only for whites. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
right,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, but and segregated menus, which was
Yeah.
confusing. as mixed race children ourselves, we were confused about which side we should identify to, with, etc. And especially with Granny then sort of identifying as black in order to keep herself safe, it was, you know, it was quite confusing. But then at the same time, you know, the you know, you know, my grandparents were elderly at the time, and they had a cleaner and a gardener, and
all the advantages of being white,
and etc. But then, you know, when I had, you know, in slightly more affluent times in my career, I've had a cleaner and etc. And I you know, I hope that well, in fact, I'll give a massive shout out to everybody that's cleaned my house over the years, and I hope that I've paid you a proportionate amount, and I am very, very grateful for you picking up my life. But look, what I would say
it's not
all I say, just to answer my own question, really, to sort of like you know, circle back on my own question. You know, I don't think that there's any argument from anyone, even the nationalist media, that Britain is broken right now. You know, and if anyone were given the choice of which, if anyone were offered the opportunity of which Commonwealth country to go to, or which, you know, English speaking country to go to, or, you know, etc., I don't think that Britain would be top of the list.
Well, this is the problem, isn't it? I mean, this is why we just wanted to jump through.
I mean,
just
you know,
because you have a servant,
the dinghies, and despite the, you know, the promises, and despite whatever, you know, in reality, in actual reality, you know, it wouldn't be.
Well, the dinghies are the dinghies are in many ways, not always, because there's Albanians, whatever, are the sins of the fathers. You know, we have to keep reminding ourselves that, and we're saying the Commonwealth, but let's wind it back to what it was, the empire. So we have to keep reminding ourselves that the empire, like all empires, like the American empire you've been talking about, which is beginning to fall, like all empires, the gain sole purpose of empire, definitely 100 years ago, was to improve the lot of the people running the empire. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean all the people who happen to associate with the empire. And by that, I mean, because Britain was and it used to be called the mother country, you would have probably said that in South Africa as well, of that empire, whilst it was there, it doesn't mean that all Britons directly reaped the advantage. They definitely indirectly did. Because what happens is with empire, that goes for the French, it goes for whomever, it doesn't matter what the empire is. Or, you know, it could be the empire of Mansa Kankan Musa in West Africa. It doesn't matter what the empire is. So there's no bitching on that. The empire, basically, whole role is to suck in the wealth from the places that you've basically colonialized in whatever format it might be. I'm just using colonial as the word, but whatever format you utilize. And so under the British system of the later mercantile class, basically the reason why people say, oh, we used to build trains and they were everywhere, all over the world. Well, actually, they were all over the empire. And because the empire was basically a third of the world, the largest empire the world has ever seen, openly. Obviously, you could argue the United States empire is such, it just doesn't fold it as an empire in that sense. But was a third of the world. It really meant that trade had to go through the United Kingdom. This is what people don't understand. If you wanted to buy a train, you had to buy it from the United Kingdom. right? You produced your good, let's say it's bauxite from, I don't know, Jamaica or somewhere, right? I say Jamaican bauxite because it does have bauxite. That bauxite was sent to the UK to create the finished goods. That South African gold, you talk about South Africa, was sent to the UK. Those South African diamonds were sent to the UK, right? So that's the whole point of empire. And if you look at it in Africa in particular, most of the roads that were not built between different parts of the country, whatever you wanted to name it in Africa. Yeah. They were built from where the resources were to the sea, right? To take them back to empire, yeah, to the imperial system. That's how the European imperial system works. So for 400 years, Europe was preeminent. Now, before that, it was other states, African states, Chinese states, whatever it might be, South American states. They've all had their play at the same sort of game, be it on a smaller level or be it on a large level, depending on how far back you want to go. So they've all played that game. And but the problem is where it becomes problematic is when we don't admit that's the game. And that's where we fell down, I believe, because we pretended it was for the good of the other people. And that's total under trash. You know, that's the problem with pretending. Just say what it is. It's exploitation. You've exploited it. And maybe the indigenous folk from whatever place it is get a little bit out of it because there will be some indigenous folk that make money, right, from it. Of course there will. That's just the way of empire. So it's that perspective that we need to make clear. So hence when you talk about where you'd like to live, and what we're doing, it's if we are still pretending, and this is our problem, I believe, if we're still pretending we're doing good for others, and we're still pretending that we are the number one country in the world, and we're still pretending that everything around the world is our business, then we fall foul of reality. So if we're giving to the Ukraine example that has nothing to do with the United Kingdom, is not in the vital interests of the United Kingdom in reality, if we're giving them 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 billion a year, right? 22 billion over the period of the war, right? Why are we surprised that we then can't run our health service? And we can't get a doctor's appointment because we've got no money. Why are we surprised? And it's doubly so when we realise that the ruling elite of the Ukraine, and this is not me saying this is the United States Accounting Office saying this. And on my wall, you won't know it, but I've got an award from the United States Accounting Office when I used to be a detective for them, and I was looking at fraud, waste, and abuse in the US military. When that accounting office actually turns around and says, of the 300 billion or whatever it is that the United States have sent them, half, I repeat, half has gone missing. Right? Half has gone missing. And of half of the weapons they've sent them, half never got there. There's now, I used to work with the US Army CID. There's a CID investigation, actually, as we speak. I've still got some mates from that US Army CID who are looking into individuals who have reaped profits from this money going missing in the Ukraine and being fed back to the United States or wherever it might be, right? So when we ask, why have we got a problem? We should look at what we are doing in the world and whether we need to do it.
It's so, honestly, look, actually, I'm starting to sound like Dr. Rachel now, but yeah, completely. Like, look, so obviously there's been narrative this year about banning social media for under 16s.
Yeah.
And but yet it's social media is is rife in terms of anti-Semitism or terrorist organizations, and you well know that because even back in the day you were infiltrating this kind of these sorts of covert operations. So by banning them, de facto you're taking you're creating a situation where those those potentially threatening conversations are going offline onto a different platform
Correct.
that can't be monitored.
Correct.
And yeah, if organizations, if furore, if anti-Semitism, if political organizations, if agitprop organizations are happy to make their recruitment via social media, frankly, as a media expert, I'm all for endorsing that because it actually means that the platforms hold accountability.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially and it's traceable. But
Mm-hmm.
by banning those things, which were obviously discussed this year, you're creating a situation whereby everyone who even has an alternative view about anything is kind of de facto forced to join an underground organization in order to just I mean, I kind of laugh, but every mum who's on a mum's WhatsApp chat sort of loves and hates it at the same time because it's sort of horrendous, but at the same time, sort of a bitch forum. But at what point do mum's WhatsApp chats be? What point are they like dismissed as agitprop? But one thing I did want to touch on, because we've obviously spoken about cultural identity. Just circling back to the millennium thing, and gender equality and the promise. The summit leaders declared that gender equality would be, from that moment forward, and that it would be solved. They didn't say assessed by 2015. They said it would be solved by 2015. And then if you just look at look at all the things that we've spoken about over the years on this podcast, Jeffrey Epstein, Me Too, Prince Andrew, Harvey Weinstein, it hasn't, has it? What life is there for and then who can you name anybody? Can you name anything, any way that female power has been balanced or in any way? I mean, look, what I can see is some lip service to things like period poverty. I can see some lip service to female genital mutilation. I can see some lip service to Me Too. I can see, but nothing's actually changed. I mean, I personally, as listeners will know, have spent the whole of 2025 battling my ex in court about something that's so completely obvious to police and professional services, in terms of domestic abuse, but yet there's an archaic law that statutory law that says that because the children's father has parental responsibility because he was named on their birth certificate, therefore he has the right to know where me and the children live, which puts us in danger. And it's just it's a broken system that is circular and means that we might have to spend the rest.
It's deeper than that. It's deeper than that.
It's completely. You see
what they're this is where we have the problem. And I think there's several things. Dr. Rachel makes it very clear that men and women are different. The situation regarding gender politics is that men and women are not different. And right there is the beginning of the rub. Because if you say that, and let me give you sort of an example. You
exactly.
can turn...
I mean, I think I just want to just take a little moment and just ask listeners if they take anything from this podcast or from any of our podcasts whatsoever. I think just take a little minute to think about men and women don't vote as the same political animal.
Correct. Correct. And so this is where we now come to the point that I'm trying to make. So what they have realized, you see, we don't live in a democracy. I don't think anybody does, to be fair, right? So we don't live in a democracy, right? What we live in is a political voter-controlled system, right? And ours happens to be first past the post, which is probably more difficult even because Margaret Thatcher, I think, won her first election with about 34% of the vote. And with that 34% of the vote, okay, she basically changed the whole way the British system worked. I've got nothing wrong with Margaret Thatcher because at least she was a conviction politician, just the same as was Jeremy Corbyn, right? But these conviction-based politicians are few and far between. What you really have is a political class who, frankly, swing whichever way you need to swing to stay in power or do power or gain power or whatever it might be. Now, because men and women tend to vote differently, right? The tendency is, and the reason why I can say this, I ran the strategic analysis unit of what was at the time called the NPRU, National Public Order Intelligence Service. Now, basically what it was is a domestic extremism unit, okay, for the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland. So it was England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland if it pertained to nuclear. So I used to write papers with my team on issues that were of interest to the United Kingdom in 3 to 5 years. So for us, that's massive longevity, right? Because Britain works on what's of interest in the next 6 months, right? But for us, that's massive longevity. So I used to write papers on that. Now, what you would find if you focus grouped people, and I used to work with Cabinet Office, because I'd provide them and give them a policing perspective or knowledge from the 120,000 police systems in the United Kingdom and the community safety officers. So they'd be out getting info, talking to people, getting a feel for people. So, and then I'd hook up with academics and find out what the academics were saying in various areas, etc. So we'd provide them that info and they'd provide us with focus grouping info. So I did it because an ex-colleague of mine from the Secret Intelligence Service, MI6, was running at the time the focusing groups for government. So what you were getting is the focusing group sit down with somebody, a B1, an A4. These are all, they split our society up into certain levels and they give them different ciphers as to what level you are in society. You know, are you earning more than 300 grand? Are you earning 10 grand? Are you a working class person with a working class mentality, or do you have a different mentality? They split them up like that. And they get numbers and then they look at them. And what they tended to see with that was that women tended to make a decision as to who they vote for, basically around the voting period. Men oftentimes took the decision, sometimes even as far back from what their parents voted. So if their parents were Labour, they may well end up Labour, particularly if they hadn't jumped, I'll use the word class, particularly if they hadn't jumped class. So if you jumped class and all of a sudden you were a working class guy, but you'd become wealthy, then you probably now voted Conservative. Whereas if you're still a working class guy, the vast majority of working class people, you'd still vote Labour. So they realize they want to break it into gender. So if you concentrate on gender, you can bring the women with you, regardless of your party, just based on issue, often. Hence is why you'll find talking against violence against women and girls, right? Because it's a woman's subject. Um, Domestic violence, it's perceived a women's subject. Black, you can go on and on and on and on. But what it has done is it's created a situation whereby they have made women more fearful in society than they actually, in general, need to be. For example, I've said it before on the show and I'll say it again, and I don't think the stats have changed any. For every one woman murdered, there are 7 men. So who should be more fearful, men or women? Now, if you look at the perpetrator, who are the perpetrators? Men, right? So the men are perpetrators in both cases. But of course, violent women's crime is increasing. Because
Yeah,
if you
it is constant. It is, but one of the things that isn't measured is how much is attributed to retaliation, because
no,
actually,
no, let me just say this one bit and I'll come back to that because that's important. Violent women's crime is increasing because what we have seen when I was looking at criminology, what we've seen is that actually the society can create a view. You know that, I know that, you're a media person, you know it for sure, right? The society can create a view. If you look at the top programs right now on television, even the top soaps on television, you will see that women are taking on, which historically would have been male traits of violence. They are taking those on in these top programs, right? So lionesses, whatever, blah, blah, blah. They're all doing this violent stuff, they're all shooting people and all got guns. And what happens is that this is Dr. Rachel, I didn't really understand it before. Not even young, she said the mind is plastic, is elastic, it moves, and it looks for traits which should be, should be what you're looking at, what should be the norm, and you take that on board. Vast majority, we talked about the talented 10 before, we probably don't, but the vast majority take on the trait and they think, yeah, oh, that's how we should be. Now, in terms of retaliation, absolutely. What I saw in my time originally, the small time I did on the street, extremely small, I saw that oftentimes when the male was abusive to the female, right, in a family relationship, the female ended up protecting the male, right? When the police were going to go in and arrest him or whatever it might be, right? They ended up protecting that male, right? Now, question. I put this question to you now. Why was that? And is that lesser because females now have a better opportunity to look after themselves? But I think there's
do you know what? Do you know what? I've mentioned on this podcast a few times how much I hero worship Dr. Laura Richards, who is a
yes, you
forensic
have, yeah.
advisor to the police about on the subject of domestic abuse. And one of the things that she says, I mean, she doesn't actually call it Stockholm syndrome, because actually she debunks Stockholm syndrome, because
Right, she's wrong to debunk it. She's wrong to debunk Stockholm syndrome, but carry on.
well, no, what she says is that Stockholm syndrome isn't actually the way it was reported. It's actually very different. And
Okay.
at whatever point we get her on the podcast, I would love to
We'd have
have
to go
her
through that.
give her
Yeah, yeah.
give her narrative, because what she actually says is that the women were actually in control of it. Whilst Stockholm syndrome as a psychological concept is valid, in terms of the actual incident, it was fabricated, because it wasn't as it was played out. But one of the things that I would say, and I've lived this in terms of my own personal experience, is that I didn't actually report my own abuse.
Mm-hmm.
I was privileged to have an NHS counsellor at the time, and she was so troubled by my narrative that
Mm-hmm.
she actually reported under her duty of care
Mm-hmm.
what I had said to the police. And between her reporting that to the police and my ex being arrested, and me actually finally giving a statement to CID, was 7 months.
Mm-hmm.
In that time, I had every opportunity. The police were calling me every 2 weeks. I had every opportunity to make that statement or to make that report,
Mm-hmm.
but I was too scared to do
Were
that.
you too scared, or what? Well, scared. What were you scared of? Let me ask that question better. Yeah,
Him and the
of the person,
repercussions.
or of the.
I wasn't scared of the police. The one thing that
No,
I
not the
would
police. I
say,
don't mean the police. I mean, or were you scared of the end of what you had?
I was scared. I was scared of the consequences because I was scared, but I was not offered protection at any point. It was never a trade to give a statement in return for protection.
Okay, yeah, I can see that.
And but that wasn't even the reason. The reason was that I was just scared of the repercussions. I wasn't presented with a timeline. If I do, if they, if I mean, look, I have a really, really positive relationship with the police, and I'm grateful for you. I'm so grateful to you because you obviously are able to validate a lot of the things that I question with you. And actually, I value the police, incredibly. Um, and I understand the challenges that their roles present to them. But at the time, I was not presented with a timeline whereby it said that at the point that I make this statement, he will be removed. Um, it was all quite woolly and quite scary, and
Mm.
and having then lived in refuge for 5 months and meeting other women who were in the same very, very, very scarily similar situation to me, and we all shared experiences, and you know the problem was that the system doesn't guarantee you security
This was my
for
question. This is my question, Fergs.
calling out that crime. And so and so in terms of women's inequality, if they are going if the system is going to shut them, if the system's going to permit them to be shut down by men, that there's an innate fear anyway that's sort of not just contextualized, it's ingrown,
Hmm. Hmm.
they've probably been brought up by mothers who've said, oh, don't say anything bad about daddy. Oh, your father's done this, but oh, it's okay, all the dads do it, or blah blah blah. um they might have been brought up in a narrative where the mother just puts everything under the apron or under the tablecloth or
This
under
is
the
this
kitchen
is this is
table.
this was the question I was trying to get to, Fergus. Is it
I
that
mean,
they've
you
been
know this,
is it
Carlton,
that
you
they've been
even know
brought up? Is
this.
it that they've been brought up in that fashion, or is it that innately within them is a system that says I've got to look after the children, and what I'm going to do is the best for the children, and perceive it that this is the best. That's the point that
Well,
I'm trying to
you
get to.
see, one
Is
of
there
the
a
things I would
perception
say,
of that? Because this is what Dr. Rachel seems to be articulating in a sense, not so starkly, but she seems to be saying that the brain will orientate people to that way of thinking, if you get what I'm saying. And it's not just women, but generally, that way of thinking is, this is what convention is. And so this is what I now do because this is what convention is, kind of.
well, it's it. This is really, really interesting, Carlton, because I was brought up. I mean, my dad was my hero.
Hmm.
But at the same time, my mum brought me up to call out anything that was wrong.
Hmm.
You know, and I think that, and because we had multicultural heritage and lived in different arenas, including Greenham Common, and essentially,
Hmm.
my mum and my aunt and my dad brought us up to stand up for what was right.
Hmm.
But I think that there is an institutionalized Britain whereby women are forced to kowtow to the status quo and unfortunately be that, mum clutching the apron strings, crying over the cooker.
I don't think they're crying over the cooker. I think that's gone a long time ago. I think, but what I'm
Okay,
saying is, in the
Carlton, but okay,
mentality,
so
maybe they're
no,
looking,
okay,
looking after
so
the
Carlton,
offspring.
right, but in terms of, okay, so look, like, let's just circle back to Rachel Reeves and
Hmm.
the clampdowns on everything, right? So just just put yourself. We're hypothesizing a lot of things from different cultures and from bygone
Absolutely.
times and all
Yeah.
and all the rest of it, right? If we were to be the ghost of Christmas present and
Hmm.
put ourselves in the mind of um a working class family right now
Hmm.
in, let's pick a place like Bolton,
Hmm.
what does Christmas look like? And let's look at economy, gender equality, politics,
Hmm.
etc., etc. Because I think, I obviously I'm mindful of time, but what does it look like? What does what does that child perceive for 2026? What does that mother think about in terms of her position as a female?
Hmm.
What does that father think about in terms of his position as maybe a breadwinner, maybe an abuser, maybe,
Maybe
etc.,
both.
etc.,
Maybe both.
maybe both.
Yeah.
And actually, if I were to circle back to what Dr. Rachel said to me, which I do find quite poignant, is, are we so angry that we've superseded the anger?
You asked me the question. I can't put myself in the position of the female. What all I can do is observe. And you've mentioned a place up north. The vast majority of people up north, women up north,
Just
e-
pick us, and I'm like, I'm trying to be like, look, we are inclusive. We're not
exactly,
being.
exactly. I'm
I'm not
not.
being unilateral
Yeah,
to public school people. We're being
I'm not
inclusive
exactly. I
to up
noticed that.
north.
I noticed it.
I,
But
I the fact I will be open and honest to all the listeners that I've only been to like a few places up north.
for one day, write the story. No, but joking aside, looking up north, what I would say is, and this is the thing that I think a lot of people always miss out on. Frankly, working class women always worked, right? At some level.
Yeah,
Even if it was that they took work into the home and did work. But if you go back far enough, and we're only talking 200 years, two and a half hundred years, they may have been down the mines pushing the carts with their children while the husband was cutting the coal, right? And then if you come forward, it's in the factories, to the 60s, 70s, 80s in the factories. Now, with factories gone because of loss of empire, maybe more and more so they're doing some other type of work. Maybe it's in hospital, maybe it's cleaning, maybe it's in a shop, maybe whatever. But in order to live, what these people are doing is they are bringing money in. Now, this is the big change. This is the big change. The big change is now, I believe, is that in the past, you could have, on a working class street, you could have, of let's say 100 houses, you could have counted the numbers of divorced people on one hand. It was extremely rare. Now you can count the numbers of divorced people in the half of that 100 of a street. maybe more than a half of that 100 of a street. So what I'm saying is, it means then that the women are actually working for themselves, controlling themselves, doing what they need themselves. So things have changed massively, massively, particularly amongst the working class, because it's the middle class who the working class wanted to be like, who tend now to be trying to keep up the system of what was meant to be right. Okay? Now, don't get me wrong, they are divorcing en masse as well, as you know, but it's in a different way, maybe. So the point I'm saying is that gender politics have changed massively, massively. And from what I know, speaking to guys, many of them are frightened that they can't live up to expectation.
Frightened or well,
Frightened.
okay.
Frightened.
This is an interesting thing to unpick, though, Carlton. I
I
mean,
was just
Dr.
talking to them
Rachel
the other day.
probably
Frightened that
would,
they
would be.
can't,
Yep.
that they're not good enough. Because, you see, I was talking to some youngsters, relative youngsters, okay, 20s, 30s, just the other day. And what they were saying is the women, as they put it, can frankly run their own stuff, get their own jobs, do everything, better jobs than them, because on average, if you're talking working class, the women are better educated than the men, right?
Mm,
So a lot of the men have little to offer for them.
mm.
So the women try and I don't want to put it too much classy, but try and jump to the next class, if you will, for want of a better saying. Right? It was always the case, you just married that class in the past. Now they don't need to marry the class, but they do. They live with the class and they want to go higher. Right? These working class lads find themselves stuck.
Mm.
Right?
So
They've little to offer, which in itself can create violence, frankly. Trying to keep
yeah,
all the system.
it is really, really, really interesting. And just because I'm conscious of time,
Yeah, I've got to
so
rock and
look,
roll soon, as have you.
I wanted to say that one of the beautiful moments about Dr. Rachel's wedding was that when was her husband David's acknowledgement of mutual respect for each other and
Mhm.
asking each other to be the best version of themselves.
Rachel would not have it any other way.
Of course you wouldn't, but no
Correct.
human should have it any other way. And
And
it was
that's the
it was
point I'm
it
making. The vast majority of women now won't have it any other way.
yeah.
I don't care whether you come
But
from Liverpool, in Liverpool 8, if you want to know where that is, if you've ever been to Liverpool, right, or Everton, or some, or from
I've been
Salford.
to the cavern. I've been to the cavern.
On a day trip. Then we got out quickly
Yeah.
before it got dark. What did I?
Yes. So Carson, I think this is actually I wanted to end 2025 in a positive way for the listeners, in a positive and thoughtful way for the listeners. But you have actually I didn't even want to do this podcast the way that we did it. I had a whole different plan, but as we always do, we like our banter takes us in a different direction and it's wonderful. And um so when you mentioned Liverpool and I said I have been there once. But look, uh do we all live in a yellow submarine? I mean, let's just think about the
I know the
politics,
premise. Yeah, I know the
the
premise you
media
mean.
bubbles,
Yeah.
the nationalistic denial, like the nostalgia, um, I would say to our listeners at the moment, I am terrified about what 2026 looks like because of the distrust in nations and distrust in politicians, and we're currently in a situation where anything can change at
Mhm.
a minute's notice, and that's even outside of my own personal dramas that listeners are obviously aware and incredibly supportive of, which I'm
Mm.
very grateful for. But we definitely live in something brightly coloured, structurally questionable, let's say, full of noise, steered by, let's say, dodgy captains, and somehow still staying afloat despite everything. So as it stands at the end of 2025, we are still, keeping calm, soldiering on, and sailing that yellow submarine to continue being British. But will it sink? When will it sink? I think that's my roundup for all of this. When will this all sink?
Well, Fergus, thank you very much for that, and I'm hoping very much that it doesn't sink. I'm hoping that we
beat
will...
that, Carlton. Beat that.
Yeah,
do you not think I did a really good roundup?
I can't beat it. That's why I'm just coming off what you just said. I'm hoping.
No,
that
what I want to hear as a roundup is, and I think the listeners want to hear this as well, is Grandma Carlton, and her 99th, and etc. And you are going off to family celebrations. I think the listeners want to hear what the first black spy in MI6 and former head of special operations is doing to celebrate Christmas.
Like anybody else, I will be sat back eating not turkey, because I don't particularly like it. I think it's dry. I find it dry. Capon, which is hard to get these days, and a booth, a lovely piece of booth, and even some lamb. So there you go, 3 things with all the trimmings. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what I call Christmas.
Happy Christmas, everyone. Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
And please stay listening in 2026.
Thank you very much. Merry Christmas. And I totally endorse what she said. See you later.
Here is a working class spy telling his stories, the secrets, the lives of spies. Feel free to message Carlton King on all socials and give this show 5 stars on Apple iTunes and subscribe so you never miss a single episode. For your ears only.
I was a member of Her Majesty's Secret Intelligence Service.